As a woman, it was a very fulfilling moment for me to head the Foreign Service. I was the second woman.
You said that the world of diplomats at that time was often a male preserve, a world filled with cigarette smoke and flowing liquor. And it was a world essentially dominated by men, and patriarchal attitudes prevailed in the Foreign Service.
One test is, imagine you're a fly on the wall. A woman has just left the room, and it's a room full of men. I'd like to think how the men speak of that woman.
This is a conversation with Nirupama Rao. She's the former Foreign Secretary of India, the second woman to hold that position, who has also served as the High Commissioner and Ambassador to countries like the US, Sri Lanka, and China. And she was the first female spokesperson for the Ministry of External Affairs. She's the author of the book, The Fractured Himalayas, and the founder of the South Asian Symphony Orchestra. This is in continuation of my lifelong dream of highlighting some of the untold stories and some of the most brilliant minds in India. So if you like this conversation, then by the end of it, please consider sharing these episodes. The YouTube algorithm doesn't consider these conversations sexy enough to push them organically, and I'm not boosted by any trust fund. So the only way I can actually continue doing this conversation, the only way this project can survive is if you find it useful, please consider sharing it around and I can organically reach more people. In this conversation, we talk about her journey becoming a diplomat. What is a foreign secretary? What do they actually do? What are some traits that might be helpful in this position? What is the art of effective diplomacy and communication? We cover the history of the Agra Summit. What was it? What went wrong? How do we solve the Kashmir question? And then we dive into the history of the dispute between India and China. And now, it's no time.
Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
You are the daughter of an army officer. Your father joined the army during World War II as a Viceroy commissioned officer. Your uncle was also in the foreign service. He was posted in occupied Japan, as they called it at that point. And you have memories of him coming home with these interesting trinkets and these stories. And you've said that these trinkets used to represent an unexplored world for you. So you decided at the age of 12, this is what I want to do. I want to become a diplomat, as all 12-year-olds, I guess. So let's start here. When most 12-year-olds aspire for such flashy professions like actors, musicians, or becoming an athlete, what was it about the world of diplomacy, about governments, about geopolitics that was so attractive to you? What was so appealing about it?
I think at the age of 12, it's very difficult for us to really envisage what the future looks like. We dream, we read stories, at least my generation read stories in books. We didn't have video games. Right. We listened to the radio. The newspaper would arrive at your doorstep every morning and you would find your dad reading it. And that kind of, your curiosity was, sparked off by that. So you wanted to read what was happening in the world. When my parents listened to radio broadcasts, you would, get bits of it and wonder what's all this commentary about. So much would come to you over the radio and in print. And then, of course, hearsay. Like you mentioned, my uncle was a diplomat. He'd been posted in occupied Japan, and he was a good storyteller. He would come home occasionally when he came back to India on leave and would visit my parents, and he would speak about his life and the interesting things that were happening around him. So all this, I think, you built a dream around these visions. And it was essentially a dream. I said, I was good in studies. I was a top of the class student. And that kind of, in a sense, paved the way, I think, for my future success also. So I would tell all young people that academics is very important, and to excel in academics really becomes a passport to success for the future. Of course, you must be a well-rounded personality, but in my time, we had very little exposure, or the menu of options was so limited. But still, it was a very rich world, and you could fantasize literally about the future. You could dream. The capacity to dream is what my parents gave me, I believe, and that is what led me to where I am today.
The capacity to dream, do you think that's changing now? Because I guess for the kids growing up, they don't get to stoke their imagination as much as you have to do when you only get to consume content through print or radio, because there's some of the pictures missing. So you have to fill in the blanks, right? Yeah. Nowadays, if you're consuming content on your videos or on your phones, you don't have to really stoke your imagination. You just receive it. Does that change the way you interact?
I wanted to add something to that. We did go to the movies.
Right.
And we did, love to go to the cinema. And in the army regimental centers, as they're called, in the cantonments, there would be a weekly cinema show. All the family would troop to that, walk across. And many times it would be outdoors. The projector could break down occasionally, and then you'd have to go home very disappointed having seen half the movie. But still, we saw a lot of movies. I did see Hollywood movies, and I did see, those days it wasn't called Bollywood, but in Indian, Hindi movies, Malayalam movies. So I grew up in a multilingual atmosphere also, exposed to all this kind of entertainment too. So there was a visual component to this dream building, as you call it.
But there has to be a perfect balance, you feel.
Yeah. Well, I think that balance comes really from the kind of discipline that your parents really try to inculcate in you. It's not just disciplining a child and saying, don't do this or don't do that, but inculcating a sense of discipline within you as a person, as a persona, as an individual, so that you're able to kind of bring balance into the kind of interests you have. To focus, I did focus on my studies, but I wasn't a bookworm in the sense that I wasn't with my nose in my textbooks all the time. I would read a lot, read outside, my school syllabus. And that, I think, expanded my understanding and also helped improve my writing style. And I wasn't I was a shy child. I was quite an introvert, I remember, and not somebody who had a lot of friends. I didn't hang out with friends, as they call it now. I would, very much prefer to have my nose in a book and keep reading. And I had a few friends, but I was very content in my own world in many ways.
I love these little nuggets or these little influences in your childhood that in the moment seem very mundane, but then when you look back with hindsight, they play such a pivotal role in shaping who you are as a person. You've mentioned that your dentist, Dr. Matthias, used to tell you stories about Chinese torture when you used to
That's right. You seem to have, know more about me than perhaps I remember.
I doubt it. But yeah, he used to tell you all these stories when he was putting an injection in your gums. You've said that when you were 6, your father got home these brochures about the centenary of the Sepoy Revolt, and those images left a mark on you. You vividly remember Jawaharlal Nehru speaking on the radio. You remember your mother donating jewelry during the war in 1962. What was the political milieu in which you were growing up? It's obviously impossible to isolate a child from the political subtext that's all around them. But do you think that's changed over time? Or do you feel politics is still a big part of society that the children are growing up today? Or there's a very big difference between the one you grew up in and the milieu today?
I think the difference in the milieu when I was growing up was that we grew up with less prejudice, I think, and less stereotypes. Because today, I think, many times, I'm not saying all sections of the media are like that, but many electronic media outlets, for instance, they have a certain way of reporting the news. They have their own views. They kind of stamp a certain approach.
They give you a judgment.
They give you a judgment. They're very often judgmental. Now, judgments are very different from being judgmental, as you know. In English, the words are quite different.
What's the difference?
Being judgmental is you're being biased, you're being sometimes very intolerant. It kind of suggests an inability to understand the other's point of view. That's what judgmental means. But making a judgment like a judge does, he or she has taken into account all aspects of the case, right? You're supposed to read all the case papers and you come out with a judgment that the world expects to be balanced and fair and reasonable. So that's the difference. So today you have a lot of judgmental approaches within, I think, the media and the way things are reported. So that's where it becomes very political. It becomes politicized, let's say. The everyday as we see it, becomes politicized. But our everyday was not politicized. You know what I mean? When I was growing up, it was not that way. There was a lot of politics, of course. There was opposition. There were opposition parties. The Congress party was running the government. You had troubled relations with Pakistan. You had problems with China. But overall, I believe there was the kind of news. The news was reported to us in a very factual way. So because we didn't have all these TV shows, but we had a news reader, I would say, on All India Radio. Melville de Mello, his name was. And there was a woman newsreader called Roshan Menon. And they were all, their voices would come across very clear, very concise, very balanced, very somehow in a kind of affirmative way, that this is the news read by Melville de Mello. That was how it would be. And then the news would follow in a very factual way. This and this and this happened. And then when you had questions, you would ask your mother or father, what's this about? And I had parents who were quite objective. And they were unbiased, let me put it that way. They knew that, I guess, in bringing up a child, you must try to give that child the opportunity to look at both sides now, literally. You know what both sides now, like your side, my side. Look at both sides and then perhaps give a little advice on how, you should judge a situation. So that's how I grew up, literally. So there was very little bias in my worldview as I became an adult. I was, of course, concerned about war. I was concerned about suffering. I would feel very bad. I remember when I would see poor people on the roads. And that is something I think comes out of you, quite instinctively. You're born, and most of us are born with that sense of compassion and sense of concern about fellow human beings. So that's how I grew up.
Makes such a key difference, right? Because then it primes you up in life the moment you receive some information to explore all sides of it, get all the information you need, rather than if you're growing up in an environment where people are just telling you this is how you should act and something is wrong or something is right. It makes a big difference. I have a lot of follow-up questions about these traits that you mentioned in your childhood, the type of person that you were. But before we do that, I'm going to jump ahead in the future and talk about what you ended up doing, because it'll provide context into all these questions about your childhood. So very silly question, won't be the first one, but what is the role of a foreign secretary? What do they actually do?
First of all, let me talk a little about how diplomacy is today. So you encompass many worlds in diplomacy today. It's not just what has happened in the past, because in the modern world, as diplomacy operates, it's become a multidisciplinary act, literally, because you're covering so many areas, whether it's politics, whether it's business and commerce and economics, whether it's climate change, whether it's people-to-people diplomacy, whether it's technology and data, because that has become, the new area of very high activity today. So the world of a diplomat is changing very, very rapidly. And you are essentially operating in the global public square. You are not operating in an ivory tower. You're not locked away in a little office somewhere and your diktats go out around the world. It doesn't work like that. It's a very permeable environment because you are exposed to all that is happening around you, real time. And you have to react, you have to formulate policy, you have to suggest options of action to your political leadership. So that really is the responsibility of every diplomat today. You're basically interpreting not only for India to our, establishment, but also about India to the world. That is really what a diplomat does. So it's a very exciting profession. It's a very challenging profession, but it's a very rewarding profession in the sense, intellectually, the kind of stimulation that you have all the time, and the kind of knowledge and experience that you imbibe as the years go by. So when you become foreign secretary, all this has been happening.
Context.
This is the context. And the foreign secretary essentially leads the foreign service. So the foreign service, as you know, is the civil service of India, which essentially engages in foreign policy and diplomacy. It kind of runs that part of government for India, for the government of India. So the Indian Foreign Service, and it's not services, as some people say. There's only one service, the Indian Foreign Service. And so the IFS is a body of civil servants recruited through the Union Public Service Commission and through the civil service examination, for which the Indian Administrative Service, the Indian Police Service, all these services are also part of that examination. I mean, anyone who seeks recruitment to any of these services has to write that civil service examination. So it's the same exam for all these services. But and then once you qualify in the written examination, you have to appear for an interview, and then you're selected for these services. And of course, the Indian Administrative Service is seen as the top service in the list of services that people want to join. But in my time, when I joined in 1973, the Foreign Service and the IAS were neck to neck. And the Foreign Service was even more competitive and more aspired to by people than even the IAS.
Why?
I don't know. It was possibly, we had just gotten over the Nehruvian era, and Mr. Nehru was our foreign minister. So he was, a titan, literally, who strode the stage for 17 years as prime minister. So I think from our generation, people grew up seeing that, how active India was as far as its diplomatic role was concerned, and the kind of profile that we had in the world. It was a time of non-alignment. It was a time of leaders, not only like Mr. Nehru, but General Nasser in Egypt and President Tito in Yugoslavia, all very Nkrumah in Ghana.
Right.
So you grew up looking at all these people meeting and talking about the state of the world. So, and since I wanted to be a diplomat, obviously I wanted to join the Foreign Service. But a lot of my generation, I think, felt that the Foreign Service was not just an elite service. I mean, that way the civil service is all a very elite organization. But the feeling that you could see you could see the world, because the world was there waiting for you. And what better way to understand the world than to join the Foreign Service? I remember as a little girl, when I didn't know about the Foreign Service, I wanted to join the Navy, because I thought, join the Navy to see the world, literally. So in that sense, there was that feeling, I want to see the world, I want to meet interesting people. And since we grew up reading a lot of Western literature and mainly in English, because I went to an English medium school, so a lot of what I read was in English. So there was that world outside. Civilizations like ours, great art, great architecture, history. History has always fascinated me. So all this made me want to join the Foreign Service. So the Foreign Service, in my time, was really quite, and even today I believe it's an elite service, but the aspiration to join the Foreign Service was so much stronger, I feel, among younger people in my generation than it is today. So when I became Foreign Secretary, essentially I came to head the Foreign Service, the senior most, and of course you're chosen on the basis of merit. Seniority alone doesn't count. And as a woman, it was a very fulfilling moment for me to head the Foreign Service. I was the second woman to be
After
Foreign
Chokla,
Secretary, yeah. Exactly. And I think in that sense it was an inflection point really for leadership by women in our service, and I think in many ways it set the trend for the future also, because here you were heading what was hitherto a rather male-dominated service, and even joining the Foreign Service for people of my generation, women, was quite a challenge. So having risen to the position of Foreign Secretary, I think was really a culmination not only of a lifetime's effort, but also in a way it kind of fulfilled not only the aspirations I had, but also seemed to demonstrate to the world around that women can lead, women are competent, women have the capability. So it said many things becoming Foreign Secretary.
I want to explore all of these. There's so much to explore. Firstly, I wish you were there to tell us how exciting this world is and how much you can get out of it. Because not many kids in school these days are just saying, you know what, I want to enter the world of diplomacy, because no one's there to tell them how much they can actually get out of this role. These are associated with the denseness of bureaucracy or government. But now, hopefully, that changes when the kids watch this. Many things to explore. You had mentioned in the previous answer how you were a shy person, you were an introvert, but you had a well-rounded personality. And I really want to explore what it takes to get you successful in this role. Your mother used to say about you that you had this dreamy quality as a child, very meditative. You could sit in the middle of a busy living room and just revise, which seems like a superpower in any profession. But this spawns off a bigger question around what are some traits, personality traits, natural traits that might help you in the position of a foreign secretary. Let's say the future foreign secretary is watching this conversation and they're taking notes on what they need to work on. What would be some aspects that might help them?
First and foremost, a belief in what you are, what you can do, and what you can aspire to. I think that confidence and that sense of conviction that I can do it is very important. I think the second quality is determination, because with that belief of conviction, you need very, very strong determination. And it has to be very cool-headed determination. It's not about, being all over the place in your determination. You have to be very laser-like and very focused. That's the second thing. Third thing is perseverance. I think many times, you fall. You have to get up, dust your knees, and walk on. So you have to walk on, despite the fact that the clouds turn dark, if I may say. And, if there's rain and thunder and lightning all around you, you can't lose sight of that goal that you've set for yourself. A goal to be good in what you do. I mean, I'm not saying that I joined the Foreign Service and I immediately knew I was going to be Foreign Secretary. Not at all. Not at all.
That was not the ambition?
Ambition was always there to excel. I think the ambition to excel was always there.
But the target state wasn't
now to be... But it was not like I
yeah.
was going around saying, this is what I'm going to be. So that leads me to the next quality, which is, I think, humility. I think, my mother would always say you should be modest, not so much humble, but modest. Modest about what you are capable of. I think it's very important. And I think the other thing is emotional intelligence as much as, actual intellectual capability, which all of us need if you have to do well in any profession that you are engaged with. So that, emotional intelligence is the capacity to read the room when you enter. You should be able to read the room. It's not, and then that leads me to the next thing, the capacity to listen. Listening capacity is so important. Very often, we are very impatient when others are speaking because we want to speak, we want to interject. So I think that capacity to listen is a great tool of learning because you can learn so much from what others have to say. And especially when they're talking sense and, they're talking on the basis of experience. So, and then and be very patient. I would say you have to be extremely patient. Perseverance, I mentioned, but patience is also necessary. I think you have to be very cool, very calm, composed. So all these are qualities that to me, and to be a good leader, you may ask me, what are the qualities to be a good leader? Of course, every leader has, that pixie dust, as I call it, of charisma, perhaps a little bit of charisma. I'm not saying that I have all these qualities, but when I look at leadership, I think you're looking at charisma, you're looking at magnetism, you're looking at the sense of security that you feel around a person who is a leader. Right? The leader is somebody you can depend on.
Was it a leader you met
trust.
where you felt that level of magnetism?
That kind of trust and magnetism.
Yeah, like an
aura.
I
think Mrs. Indira Gandhi had that, and because she had just emerged from the Bangladesh war, and she was really riding the crest of that wave. Yes, I think she did have that. And Mr. Nehru, I never met because I was too young at that time. So I think I would put Mrs. Gandhi. I think that the assassinated foreign minister of Sri Lanka, Lakshman Kadirgamar, he had a lot of that charisma and magnetism. But of course, unfortunately, he didn't live to see the end of the civil war in Sri Lanka, and he was assassinated. And I grew up being a big admirer of President John F. Kennedy. I never met him again. But my generation, after his death, I think the whole world, mourned his death because he was young, but he had a lot of, I believe, charisma. And I think a leader inspires hope in you. and inspires trust. I think these are all qualities that you need.
Okay, future leaders taking notes right now. You mentioned that when you joined this line of work, it was a male-dominated world. You were the second woman in the position. You were the first woman spokesperson for the Ministry of External Affairs as well. A 1933 debate in the British House of Commons said that the special virtues of women are ill-suited for diplomatic life. And these special virtues were intuition and sympathy, very ill-suited. And you mentioned in previous interviews that there were many stereotypes or prejudices about women in these positions. One mock concern that was thrown around was how will women travel at night, whether it'll be safe for them or not. And you said that the world of diplomats at that time was often a male preserve, a world filled with cigarette smoke and flowing liquor. And it was a world essentially dominated by men, and patriarchal attitudes prevailed in the foreign service as they did in every sphere at that time. So can you paint that picture for me? What was that world like? What were some of the prejudices, stereotypes that existed back then when you joined?
I always say that one test is to be, imagine you're a fly on the wall and a woman has just left the room and it's a room full of men. And very often I say, I'd like to think how the men speak of that woman who has left the room. We don't know. I don't know. But very often the sense I get is that in most societies, I'm not saying that India is, a solitary example in this sense. In most societies, it's male-dominated. And the role of women has really not been fully evolved in the sense of what they contribute to society and its progress. Because women are not represented enough, and women have not been traditionally looked at in a way that here is somebody equal to a man who can carry the weight on her shoulders, who has the capacity and the capability to do work, to be able to fulfill certain duties, and to make a difference. So I think that really is the kind of patriarchy that we still have to contend with as women. I'm not talking just of the Foreign Service I'm talking in general, across the world. The United States of America has never had a woman president so far. And what does that tell you? That there are certain entrenched attitudes about the role of women and the confidence that can be reposed in a woman to lead a country. So that is really what we are contending with. And that environment has to change. That environment has to
how will
transform.
It change?
Well, I think, first of all, more and more women will have to come into the public square, as I call it. They will have to take on positions of responsibility. They will need more women leaders. The numbers are still small, but, they need to slowly appreciate in strength.
Is it lack of initiative from their end, or is it because its system is set up in such a way that they don't even feel comfortable entering, or they're not allowed to rise up the ranks?
I mean, there are many answers to that question. The system, I don't believe, take our system in India, constitutionally, politically, there's room for women. Nobody is saying women cannot acquire positions of responsibility. But there are social customs, social norms, prejudices, traditions that are ingrained in our society for millennia, and they're not going to change so quickly. Even in educated families, there are entrenched opinions about the future, how educated women should decide their future. It's usually the men who would prescribe, who would, may I use the word, pontificate on, what a woman's future should be. So I personally had to contend with that, let me say, in my growing up years, not with my parents exactly, but with the larger extended family. There were very, very clear attitudes about, what I should be doing, that, I should get married. I had completed my graduation, so it's time to get married. So there were those attitudes, and I owe it to my parents who had that kind of enlightened, emancipated approach to what the role their daughters should take on as they grew up. They wanted each one of us, 3 sisters, to be professional, to study, to educate ourselves, and to take on occupations so that we would be economically independent. I think that was a very progressive attitude, and we need more of that progressiveness within families across the country, across the world. And that, I think, would be a good first step. And then we need far more representation of women in every sphere of life. You need representation, which is why, this constitutional, the amendment to have representation of women in panchayats, for instance, 30 years ago. Now in Parliament, I hope that becomes a reality. So I think initially you would have to have some quotas for women, but ultimately I think it should be a 50-50 representation in every organization. And I hope that happens. May not happen in my lifetime, but perhaps in the next generation. But I would say that in the Foreign Service, I personally did not encounter any discrimination, personal discrimination. I must say that. However entrenched certain attitudes may be, the patriarchy was there, but the people, the male colleagues I dealt with, I was very fortunate, I think. They gave me the space to grow, to develop, and entrusted me with sensitive tasks and very high responsibilities. So in some senses, we also owe it to the men, who think progressively.
You've credited Jaswant Singh for looking far ahead, for appointing you as the first female spokesperson.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm glad you did. I remember reading this, I think Barack Obama's autobiography. I can't remember the source, but he had said that in order to be the first black president of America, he had to be 10 times better than everyone else. He had to not give them an inch, because that's what it takes to actually shatter these stereotypes and shatter the glass ceiling. So I see something similar here. Okay, so back to the role of the foreign secretary. What's the balance? How much leeway do you get in decision-making strategy, coming up with foreign policy, versus being an effective communicator of the party line? You just have to toe the party line, you don't get to go beyond it? Or do you actually have some agency in also deciding how you shape foreign policy?
Instead of the word party line, I would say the policy line.
The policy line.
There's always a policy line, and especially in certain relationships and also on multilateral issues, there is a policy line. And let's face it, you as a bureaucrat, as a civil servant, are expected to follow that line. But then as you acquire higher positions of higher responsibility, you begin to contribute also to the making of policy based on not only the experience that you have gathered, but also the knowledge to be able to prescribe new options, because you are experienced enough by that time to be able to suggest to the political leadership that this A, B, or C are possible new options that we should be considering. And of course, all that policy making goes through a certain system. It's not like, it happens overnight, but then there's a certain procedure through which it goes through the system. It gets approved at the highest level.
What is the procedure?
So we have, policy notes, cabinet notes that are prepared, and then the Prime Minister usually chairs the committee, the cabinet committee that decides on these options and what the way forward should be. So there's a very systematic, very well laid out procedure that takes place. But to come back to my point, as a senior person, you become you generate these ideas. You know what I mean? You are called upon, you're expected really to be creative and to have the confidence and the knowledge and the judgment to be able to suggest to the government that these are options that you need to follow. So you play a very important role in policy making also, not just in following the policy line as we began with.
On your website, you've said diplomacy is a profession that is full of life's lessons, how wars are created or prevented, how negotiations succeed or fail, how just as in our personal lives, so too in affairs of state, we should be far-sighted, firm without being overbearing, conscious of our interests, not allowing them to be eroded, and determined to defend them and act with responsibility. So, what are some hacks, insights, tips that you can give for the art of effective communication? Let's say I'm a student, I've come here today, and from you I want to learn how to engage in tough issues without alienating the person who's sitting across you. What are some advice you can give me for communication?
I think the first and most important quality that you must possess is credibility. The person sitting across, you're sitting across from me, you should be thinking internally, now, does this person come across as genuine and credible? I think that is very, very important because, as human beings, we can judge people also quite quickly because, you can you can read a person, at least that's what life has taught you.
So this is all body language? Like this is all
Body
exterior?
language, the way you engage, the eye contact, the way you speak in a measured way. And you're trying to convince the other person, you're trying to persuade the other person, but you should be able to tell the other person that you are credible, you can be believed, that there's no need to distrust you. I think that is important. The second point is that you should speak from the position of substance. You just can't be speaking in the air. You can't be spinning things. Spin is not something you can do as a diplomat. You can't spin things. I mean, this is not, an occupation that is about spinning.
Hawa ki baatein.
Yeah, you just cannot do that. You have to speak, and people see through you on that also, because an audience will know when you're spinning and when you're not, really. Most people, I mean, unless they're so naive or amateur. So substance is also necessary. So credibility and substance. And then finally, confidence. I mean, because speaking before an audience, particularly before media, when you are an official, there's a bit of risk that you take also. There's a risk that you could be misinterpreted. A risk that you could be misreporting, and that could cause embarrassment to the government. So you have to speak in very measured way. You have to choose your words carefully. Nothing in excess, no frills, no embroidery. But at the same time, I think eloquence is a quality that inspires people. So your audience should also, look at you and say, this is somebody I can trust and speaks sense, that is not spinning, and yet is speaking in an eloquent way. It's not speaking in a mechanical way or, just reading out from a paper. I think you should be able to engage your audience.
Very, very useful insights, and speaks so much about the power of diplomacy. You've put in a quote in your book, The Fractured Himalayas, by Martin Luther King, who had said, the past is prophetic in that it asserts loudly that wars are poor chisels for carving out peaceful tomorrows, and diplomacy is the real way to actually have negotiations. Okay, let's pivot slightly and talk a bit about Indian history. You were the spokesperson for the Ministry of External Affairs during what I consider was a very tempting chapter in Indian history, which was the Agra Summit. I feel this is one event that is not given the weight it was due, because it was one of the big what-ifs in Indian history. You've said it was like foreign policy conducted in an amphitheater. The media played a huge role at that point. In hindsight, you've said the government was maybe a bit too reactive rather than being active. Jaswant Singh had said that there were too many midwives, but the baby was still born. You've expressed a desire to write a book about the Agra Summit. So I have to ask you, for people who don't know, who don't have the context, what was the Agra Summit? What was it supposed to do?
The Agra Summit was about India and Pakistan, as you know. And it was about a summit between our then Prime Minister, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, and General Pervez Musharraf of Pakistan, who by then had declared himself president, of course, although it was really army rule in Pakistan. So it was decided that General Musharraf and Prime Minister Vajpayee should meet, that there should be a summit, and it would take place in New Delhi in 2001, in the summer of 2001. And Agra, the Agra's part of the summit, was supposed to be a retreat. That is, they would meet in Delhi, they would have an initial round of discussions, and then they would move to Agra and have further discussions, but it would be a retreat. Now, if you know...
Like Camp David of sorts.
Yes, yes, absolutely. So, like, the meaning of the word retreat, you understand, it's something away from the madding crowd and from the hangama, let's say, of what normally a summit between India and Pakistan would be. There would be peace and quiet, and the two leaders would discuss and come up with ideas about how this relationship could be managed and whether we could reduce tensions and how we chart the way forward. That was the intention of the Agra Summit. But as it turned out, 24/7 television had just come to India. About a year before that, I think, in many news channels, sprouting all over the horizon, literally. So what happened is, when the delegations retired to Agra, the whole media also came along. I mean, they also camped there. So it became very different from what was originally envisaged. You had this huge, it was almost a circus, I would say. So the leaders were engaged in their discussions. The media wanted to be fed constantly. They were at our doors, literally, saying, we want information. So it should not have been like that. I think there are lessons for us about how these things should be managed also. When you declare that it's going to be a retreat, there should be certain do's and don'ts and a good management regime put in place on how you would deal with the public aspect of it. Obviously, you have to inform the public. I'm not saying you should hide things. I mean, what has to be told. There are certain things that will always be secret and confidential in government-to-government discussions. And the governments have the right to maintain that secrecy and confidentiality. It's not that the media can demand that they be told everything that has happened, because it doesn't work like that in any country, in any civilized country, in any, whatever form of government. So you had this situation, and then it just kind of, the whole thing collapsed around basically this issue of how the media was interpreting certain things and what was said to the media. I think it has lessons for us on how also we manage the media as government people. We need to have strategies. We need to plan things in advance. We need to know what can be said and what cannot be said. We need to anticipate, really, what reactions could be like. It's like war gaming, literally. You have to prepare. You have to understand that, you may have many, many twists and turns, and you could be ambushed, for instance. So how do you prepare for that?
If not for the media, was that the closest we would have come towards solving the Kashmir question at that point?
No, I'm not saying. I don't believe that. But because the Kashmir question is so complex, it's not going to be solved in one summit. It needs protracted, very, very painstaking, very long drawn-out efforts.
Can it be solved now? Or is it like with time it's getting harder and harder with more animosity, more wars, more baggage is being added?
I'm really not in a position to answer that. There are questions of sovereignty involved. Sovereignty is so important for every country. But I think the first step towards building any peace or tranquility has to be in putting in place measures that build confidence between the two sides and ease tensions and come up with step-by-step solutions. This is not something like you swallow a magic pill and the frog is transformed into a prince overnight. It's not like that. It takes a lot of effort. It's a lot of, I don't want to use the word blood because that involves war, but a lot of sweat and toil and tears also, perhaps.
But is there like a reasonable conclusion or some resolution?
I think, first of all, because the current atmosphere between India and Pakistan is so tense and so alienated, and there is no communication literally between the two countries, which has been quite unprecedented all these decades. I don't think we've had a situation like this, but that's the reality we have to contend with. I think the way forward from here is to see how we can, in a sense, create some outlet which enables
dialogue,
contact, communication, at least in some way, some medium of communication. It need not be full-blown dialogue initially, but we need better crisis management. We don't want things like Balakot and Sindoor to happen. The terrorism from Pakistan's side, all that has to stop, because the public atmosphere in India, for instance, is so weighed against Pakistan today, for all that we have suffered, that, from the other side, Pakistan has to realize that. And the world, of course, must understand that. We have been victims. See, Pakistan also has terrorist acts happening there, but I think in many ways they are things of their own creation. They have created a certain atmosphere within that country. They have fostered the growth of the army, the ISI, have fostered the growth of terrorist groups and used them as an instrument of state policy against Pakistan, against India, against Afghanistan also, as you know. So it's such a poisoned chalice that they're drinking, from. And so, you can ask me what is India to do in this situation. So in many ways, the current problems that we face with Pakistan are essentially Pakistan's own creation and our reaction to that, because any government, any elected government, has to take into account the wishes of the people also, and the people are very, I think, by and large, against Pakistan for the kind of damage and injury it has foisted on us over the last few decades. So that has to change. But I am a votary for contact and communication between the two sides in order to manage crises better, in order to see how we can avoid face-to-face conflict, because we are two nuclear-armed countries, and let's take that seriously. I think, people sometimes don't take that seriously enough. Let's not toy with these things. Let's be serious about the implications of two nuclear-armed countries facing each other in a warlike situation. So for these reasons, I feel we need to inject diplomacy into the process.
You brought up things get very complicated when there's sovereignty involved, and this is something I definitely want to explore with you because you've studied this in detail. One of the first areas that you studied was South Africa and apartheid system in South Africa. Then a few years later, you were posted as the first secretary of the Indian High Commission in Sri Lanka, where you witnessed firsthand the discrimination faced by the Sri Lankan Tamils, who have been discriminated against for decades, ever since their ancestors were sent to the tea plantations.
These are the Indian origin Tamils.
Right.
But there are the Jaffna Tamils who are a different section of the Tamil community.
And then you've also documented the Tibetan struggle in your book, The Fractured Himalayas. Over all these conflicts, there's a constant theme of self-determination. People just want their own state. People want freedom and autonomy. So I have the silliest question for you possible. Since you have studied geopolitics, you're the expert. Why can't we just give them what they want? Why can't Kashmir become its own state? Why can't the Sri Lankan Tamils have their own state? Why can't the Palestinians have their own state? Just give people what they all want. Won't that be a better world with more peace and less war?
What do people, you're talking of Kashmir, what do people want? It's essentially a problem between India and Pakistan. Now, the Kashmiri people, I agree, but they're now a divided territory because Pakistan is occupying a part of Kashmir. And then we have on our side,
what they say we have occupied under military occupation.
But let's say Kashmir is a bone of contention between our two countries. So it's not a question of giving things up. I think it's a question of how can you use diplomacy to resolve these issues, between India and Pakistan, in a way that enables both the divided sides of Kashmir to be able to interact more with each other, with families that are divided to be able to communicate with each other, travel to each side, but trade across. So, where these kind of dividing lines become less of a barrier between the people of Kashmir on both sides. I think that really is the best solution as I can envisage it for the moment. It's not a question of giving up sovereignty. How can India give up its sovereignty when the approach that we've taken is that Jammu and Kashmir are an integral and inalienable part of India. And that is not going to be easy for any country, any sovereign country to surrender. So as a democracy, we are a union of states. We are an example of very rich diversity. And I think, many Kashmiris today are so integrated with the rest of the country. We hear the news from Srinagar or, we hear the news from the line of control where there's firing or where there's some kind of bomb attack. But then many Kashmiris live, within our borders, India as a country, and they're well integrated. Just the other day, I interviewed some candidates for a very prestigious scholarship. I will not name it, but one of them was a Kashmiri boy who won the scholarship. And my parting words to him were, make India proud of you, because you are a young man of great promise, and you are here because of India. India has given you this opportunity. So I think as a country, as a system, I think, you take away all the news that you hear, the armed forces, special powers in Kashmir, or But by and large, the system as we operate within India is quite fair and quite equitable.
The case from the other side would be that Kashmir is under military occupation. In fact, what would be the difference between China saying the same about Tibet, that I think Tibet belongs to China, right? So in that case, India is playing the same role as China in Kashmir, right? I guess the big distinction that I'm trying to make is, instead of holding people by force and telling them you should belong here, which is what's good for you, let them make the choice on their own. And most likely
No, it doesn't work like that. I think, in order to maintain a certain structure, a certain stability, a certain balance, borders have to be respected. Sovereign borders have to be respected. And entire countries, entire systems are built on that basis. You're not talking, you cannot think of a breakdown of that order. Even in Sri Lanka, you talked about the Tamils and the Sinhalese. But Sri Lanka is a small island country. And I think it deserves to be united. And it deserves to be united in a way that both communities and the Muslim community live in coexistence with each other, and not to be, in a state of civil war with each other. That requires, of course, the majority community to respect the wishes of the minorities and to be able to integrate them in a way that they feel an equal part of what the nation is. So these are responsibilities, I think, that any government has, and any majority community too.
The problem is respecting sovereign boundaries, and we can now get into your book, The Fractured Himalaya, as well, is because, as you've covered in detail in the book itself, boundaries are not considered constant. They considered so fluid. What's the source of the boundaries? This has been the source of the India-China dispute as well. You've covered the three-body problem with India, China, and Tibet. So I have a slight unfair question for you. But one of the motivations for why you wrote the book was because you felt memory of the 1962 war was hazy. The newer generations don't have much context into why this dispute exists. So why does the dispute between India and China exist? What's the source?
Well, the source, there is a territorial conflict, obviously, between the two countries. And it is also, in a sense, in a more figurative sense, a clash of two systems. They're a authoritarian communist country, and we are a very vibrant democracy, diverse and plural in so many ways, and practicing constitutional freedom. So it's a different system, also the clash of two systems. And I wouldn't say it's a clash of civilizations. You may ask me, you may say the next thing, is it a clash of civilizations? I wouldn't say it's a clash of civilizations, because India and China, two great civilizations, civilizations that have made Asia in many ways, they really have contributed to the idea of Asia in that sense of the word. There's no clash, because we dealt a lot with each other across history, especially across the Silk Road. Buddhism was such an influence, trade. Just the cultural interaction between the two countries was so rich. And even to this day, I've lived in China. I think the Chinese are very interested in that civilizational aspect of India and China as they coexisted with each other in the past. So I think that is an asset for us, and I think we should be able to take strength from that. But as far as the territorial conflict between the two countries is concerned, yes, it comes from, different ideas of where our borders should be. The clash of sovereignty, particularly along the Himalayan frontiers of India. And of course, the issue of Tibet. Now, India recognized Tibet as a part of China more than 70 years ago. And many people in the country, perhaps our country, seem to have put that aside. That's not something you can put aside. You have accepted, and the rest of the world, it's not just India, the rest of the world has accepted China's sovereignty over Tibet. Nobody is questioning that. I think where we come in, and my book also was a very fair exposition of that. I did not advocate Tibetan independence at any stage in that book. I merely told the story. I told the story of how this had evolved in the early years after independence. The British left us with so many problems, and I need not, go into detail about that. I think many have spoken about it. And this was one of the problems left over from the British Raj. They had a certain imperial approach towards Tibet. They, kept a presence in Tibet, and we inherited that. we had to deal with that in the early years after independence. And I think Prime Minister Nehru took the decision that we could not allow that imperialist project to continue in Tibet, because we are not an imperialist country. Imperialism is the antithesis of what we stand for. And therefore, it was decided to kind of repurpose the relationship with Tibet and make it much more an India-China relationship, where Tibet, being a bordering area of India, where we should be able to have a trade and consular presence so that the relationships could continue. There could be border trade, pilgrimage, people-to-people contacts, and that really was the intention. It so happened that once the Chinese came into Tibet in 1951 and enforced their presence there was a revolt against Chinese rule in Tibet, and the Dalai Lama came to India in 1959. He took refuge because he feared for his future in Tibet. And that's how we have a Tibetan refugee community also in India today. As a result of that, many of them came across to India. Here we are, we have given refuge to the Tibetans, to the Dalai Lama. He's a very respected religious and spiritual leader for us. We have never said he's a political leader of Tibet. Never. That must be emphasized. We respect him as a religious and spiritual figure. And we see Tibet as a part of China. It's called the Tibet Autonomous Region of China, but in all senses of the word, it's a part of China. And I think the government, deep down, I think every Indian would like our old relations with Tibet to continue, those spiritual relations. There's so much that has bound Tibet and India together in the past: religion, spirituality, just the fact that contiguity, we are just next door to them. So it's just much easier for Tibetans to travel to India than to other parts of China. So those old connections have all been severed. That is a tragedy. It is one of the tragedies of recent history. So that's where we are with Tibet.
One of the things I found very fascinating in your book was this sense of contrast that you created between the two central figures, which is Jawaharlal Nehru and Zhou Enlai, and how they compare as people, as leaders, and in their strategy. About Zhou Enlai, you've said he possessed the sophistry and veneer of the classic Chinese Mandarin, and he deployed it to excellent use. For instance, at Bandung, and with Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger, he acted his part as China's face to the world. At the conference, he was the talk of the town, the object of almost forensic attention, widely seen as the shrewdest Asian diplomat of his time, according to the Western media. For Jawaharlal Nehru, you've said he was similar to Isaiah Berlin's fox, who knew many things. I'll quickly read up Berlin's description of the fox. Those who pursue many ends, often unrelated and even contradictory, connected, if at all, only in some de facto way for some psychological or physiological cause, related to no moral or aesthetic principle. These lead lives, perform acts, and entertain ideas that are centrifugal rather than centripetal. Their thought is scattered or diffused, moving on many levels, seizing upon the essence of a vast variety of experiences and objects, what they are in themselves, without consciously or unconsciously seeking to fit them into or exclude them from any one, unchanging, all-embracing, sometimes self-contradictory and incomplete, at times fanatical, unitary inner vision. Now, to say all of this applies to Nehru is an exaggeration, but of course he's closer towards the fox than the single-minded hedgehog. He clearly maybe overestimated China's respect for the civilizational history that you were talking about and the respect for the neighbors, underestimated their expansive mood or their capacity for war, even though Sardar Patel kept giving him warnings. So how would you create a character study of the two leaders, Nehru and Zhou Enlai? What were they like as people, as personality, as leaders? What can we learn from both of them?
Well, exactly how, it was said in my book. I don't think I need to elaborate on that. Both of them, of course, were very charismatic leaders of their countries and who left an imprint on the history of both their countries. And I think at that unique moment, turning point in history, you had a leader like Jawaharlal Nehru in India, and you had a leader like Zhou Enlai, apart from Mao Zedong, in China. And these were, in very many senses of the word, makers of history, really, because we were newly independent countries. China, as they called it, newly liberated, and we were newly independent. So, the whole world was at our feet, and nations had to be shaped, policies had to be made, relationships had to be built. So they were the builders, the architects. You may argue that the relationship between India and China that they left behind is something that we still have to continue to work on. It's an unfinished project in many ways. But in their own way, both these leaders left a great mark on the history of their countries. They were different in personalities, no doubt. The historical experiences and the matrix from which each emerged. You look at the history of China when it was fighting for its liberation. Very different from what we experienced in India, our freedom struggle. Ours was a non-violent struggle. It was in many ways a negotiation, literally, what we wanted, our ultimate goal of independence and freedom. We struggled, no doubt, and great sacrifices made, but the approach was different. We did not want to spill blood. We didn't want to engage in violence. Mahatma Gandhi was very clear about that. And Mr. Nehru and Sardar Patel, they all came out of that tradition. They were very well educated, very modern people. Our leadership at that time, Gandhi, Nehru, Patel, they were all people who were exposed to the best ideas from across the world. None of them was insular or inward-looking. They were nationalist in the best sense of the word, taking the best from, and very cosmopolitan leaders, all of them, each and every one of them. So Zhou Enlai was, I would say he was a cosmopolitan leader also, a Marxist, educated in Europe, and came from a rather, patrician background in China. He was not from a peasant background. He was also a very well-educated man. So he, in that sense, he also embodied a certain early 20th century spirit, I would say, a sort of enlightenment that came from that period where so much was changing and history was being made. But I think the conditioning of both these leaders was different. Mr. Nehru, by virtue of our freedom struggle and the way we had, ours was in the approach that we took in terms of bringing diverse and different sides together. And that was how India itself, the Union of States, the whole, what Sardar Patel did after independence, bringing the nation together. Ours was a different experience from the Chinese. The Chinese had so much blood spilt, so much, violence, so much of militancy in that whole struggle. So the conditioning was totally different, totally different. The moral side of our struggle was so strong. It was so infused with that morality, much less so in China. So on the Chinese side, I think you had, in a sense, I would say a certain, there was much more extremism, I think, in the Chinese view of things, and the willingness to use force when necessary. When Nehru hesitated till the last moment when it came to the question of using force against China. And so these were the different aspects that each leader brought to the table.
You have said that even though Nehru might have failed, he failed heroically. He failed for the right reasons, which I definitely agree with. You're one of the few people who studied this conflict extensively, probably one of the most informed people about this conflict. If the government's watching right now, how do we solve this conflict? Is there a resolution?
Again, there are no easy solutions. Yeah. We are here to not only solve the problem, but also provide a set of solutions, perhaps, options. And giving up territory is not, it seems so impossible to envisage. And it is impossible for us to envisage, and who knows, even on the Chinese side, they may have the same approach. So for 30 years, from 1990 to 2020, or even before that, I would say from 1975 to 2020, we maintained peace and tranquility on the border between India and China. There were confidence-building measures in place, and patrolling was, going on in a very carefully calibrated manner. And we maintained a certain situation along that boundary where no blood was shed, where there was no military confrontation. And I think we should return to that because Galwan happened in June 2020 and the relationship sort of collapsed after that. So now we are building it up again, brick by brick. And I think there has to be a certain process of that rebuilding that has to be gone through. And we'll have to bide our time, literally, before we can think of that a next generation where a solution can be reached. I think we should maintain peace along the line of actual control. We should develop relations in areas between India and China where it is in the national interest of each country to do so. But in the field of trade, where there are certain critical dependencies that somehow we have allowed to develop vis-a-vis us and China, I think we have to really scale that down and build. That's where Atmanirbharta and self-reliance and independence, in terms of supply chains and other things come up. So, that whole formula of de-risking in terms of our dependencies on China should be a very, very top national priority.
I'm going to pass the message to the government. They're listening. Before we start wrapping up, I would love to know, what do you think I've built with the Lego? What is this masterpiece?
Well, it looks like a very interesting piece of architecture. And there's a sense of shelter. And there's a sense of as if it's a leader holding, a society in his or her hand. Wow. In a very sheltering way, in a very protective way. And I think, to me, it seems to be something that I haven't seen a Lego for a very long time, since my children played with it. But I would look at it like that. I would look at it as the sheltering society.
The sheltering society, this is a work of art. I'm going to auction this now. Genius is what I would say it is. Okay, let's go into some closing questions. What are some books, movies, role models that have strongly inspired you in your life?
In terms of movies, I loved Satyajit Ray's first movie, Patriarchy.
Right, yeah.
And in terms of Hollywood movies, Gone with the Wind and The English Patient. I like that very much. And recently I saw a TV serial because everybody wants to understand Trumpian America today. And I saw this series on HBO called The Task. And it's about Middle America. It's about society in Western Pennsylvania, which is very close to the Appalachians, and a rather economically depressed area, and society in that context. And families who want to make more money, and what that leads them into, the trouble that leads them in, that they are led into as a result. How the law enforcement machinery responds. Very, very interesting. I like that very much. And in terms of books, I've been, just on a lighter vein, the Judge D, D-E-E, the Judge D mysteries. You're talking of China. And if you want to understand a little about historic China and read it in a lighter vein, like an Agatha Christie or a, Hercule Poirot story, these are all mysteries, but they're set in historic China, in the Tang Dynasty China. That's, more than 1,000 years ago. And it's about this character called Judge D. He solves mysteries. And he's a high official in the Tang setup, in one of the municipalities. So it's a good window into understanding Chinese society at that time, and including Chinese society today. Their values and the way the hierarchies are operating, but in a very readable way. Judge D mysteries, and they're written by a diplomat, a Dutch diplomat called Robert van Gulik. He died many years ago, but he had been a diplomat in China many years and understood the Chinese, I suppose, read a lot and was a China expert. Interesting, very interesting. And what else?
Role models.
Role models. Well, I grew up, the first biography of a woman biography that I'd read was about Madame Curie, the scientist, Marie Curie. She became a bit of a role model for me. And then I think, like Mrs. Gandhi used to speak about Joan of Arc being a model for her, we also grew up with stories of Joan of Arc, so that was a model. Mrs. Gandhi, Indira Gandhi, definitely, because she was somebody we all looked up to when we were growing up, a strong woman who was leading the country, seemed to be made of, metal, literally, very strong in her convictions. So that's quite an inspiration.
You've lived under the term of every prime minister in Indian history. Who's the closest that we've come towards like a golden era or a leader that we have to emulate? This is the greatest prime minister in Indian history. Is there one?
I think for me, it's a question of progression. We say progress, but it's also progression. And in that journey of progression, I think every prime minister has contributed. Very difficult to say so-and-so stood out. Of course, Jawaharlal Nehru was there at a very, very critical moment of, literally of nation building. So his role, I think, has to be recognized by posterity. We can't dismiss it for all his faults and failings, which everybody has, there's no doubt. But the fact is that you have to, I think he was a truly charismatic figure, in my view. And Barack Obama, I think, is also somebody, a pioneer in many ways. And the fact that as a black politician, he led a largely white country and with a great deal of dignity and vision. So I think it's a lot for young people to learn from that kind of story. So these are some of the role models. I've mentioned all political leaders, but I get inspired by good writing. It doesn't depend. There may be many writers involved. There may be a long list, but good language, eloquent writing, the force of ideas. These are all inspirational things for me. So there's a whole array of people involved in that.
From one role model to another, what would you like your legacy to be? How do you want to be remembered? What impact do you want to leave behind?
I would like to be remembered as somebody who, I think my dignity is very important for me, that sense of dignity of who I am. Somebody who maintained her dignity and composure and conviction, and who was determined to excel, tried to do her best, tried very hard, and meant no harm to anybody.
I think you've understated all your contributions. And along with the work that you've done in the government, also your work with the South Asian Symphony Orchestra as well, I think all of that is building towards a very, very rich legacy. I want to read a verse from a poem called Weapon Woman by Gwendolyn Brooks. And it goes something like this. Where life has been a baffled vehicle and baffling, but she fights and has fought according to her lights. And the lenience of her whirling place, she fights with semi-folded arms. Her strong bag and the stiff frost in her face that challenges when and if. And altogether, she does rather well. I think this poem applies well
Thank you
to
very
this
much.
conversation as well. Final question, the easiest one for you. What is the meaning of life, Ambassador Rao?
Life, I think, is to be lived to the hilt with spirit, with hope, with enthusiasm, and devoid of cynicism.
Ambassador Rao, if people wish to connect with you, find out more about you, read your work, read your essays, read your books, what is the best way to find you, connect with you, read your work?
Well, you could find me on the social media platform X, where I have 1.2 million followers, at nmenenrao. And my writings are all on www.clippings.me/Nirupama Rao. So that would be a way to find what I'm writing, what I'm up to. And the symphony, the South Asian Symphony, which is a peace project that my husband and I established about 7 years ago. The website is www.symphonyofsouthasia.org. And we also publish a Substack. In fact, I have my own Substack called Notes from Beyond, which I've not been very diligent about updating. But there is some of my writing there. And the South Asian Symphony has a very active journal called Accord, ACCORD, and that can be found on Substack.
Ma'am, thank you so much. This has been a true honor and a privilege for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful to talk with you.
This is No Time. If you like what you just watched or listened to, then do consider subscribing on YouTube, following on Spotify, or rate 5 stars in Apple Podcasts. This is now my full-time job for a year. And if I can't get this project up and running, I can't pay the bills with this project, then I'll have to shut shop because unfortunately, I'm not a trust fund baby. I cannot support this lifestyle. So if you think this project has value and deserves to continue, then please consider becoming a member on Patreon. You can join as a YouTube member. You can buy super thanks. You can buy gifts on Instagram Reels. Any contribution will keep this project running. If not through monetary channels, then do consider sharing these episodes, leaving your likes and comments. They all go a really long way. Shows of this nature are not algorithm friendly. It's not considered sexy content. It's not likely to go viral. But I really believe in the power of these stories that are never told, these conversations that are not had because they're not less likely to go viral. So if you really think these conversations are of value, these stories deserve to be told, then please consider sharing these episodes. It really helps push these videos past the barriers that are set by the algorithm and also past all this AI junk that's coming on YouTube these days. For other forms of love and support, you can follow this channel on Instagram or Twitter or follow me personally.